welcome to this latest in a series of webinars organized by the Center for Critical Thinking of Naples, Florida. My name is Bill Pope, and I'm a member of the board of the CCT. Let me mention a couple of ground rules before we begin. First, this session is being recorded and will be available soon on the CCT YouTube channel. Dr. Hertzberg and I will not be able to see or hear you, but we invite and welcome your questions and comments via the Q&A feature. Will read as many as time permits, I apologize in advance if I can't get to all of them, because we will have quite a few people on here. Of course, the large audience is a good thing. I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Richard Hertzberg, who will make an initial presentation on plastics, the ocean's curse, and then we'll answer questions about the topic. Many of you will have seen Dr. Hertzberg's informative and timely webinar last fall about the collapse of the condo tower in Surfside, Florida. That webinar has been seen more than 7,000 times by viewers in the US and internationally. Today's topic is equally important, as some of the avalanche of plastic waste that we put into the oceans ends up in the human food chain. Dr. Hertzberg is Professor Emeritus of Engineering at Lehigh University and the former chair of Lehigh's Department of Materials Science and Engineering, where he received major teaching, research, and service awards. He was the recipient of the 2000 Educator Award from the Metallurgical Society, citing him as the most outstanding material science educator in the nation. He's lectured worldwide, has published several hundred peer-reviewed research papers, and recently completed his 7th textbook. It's an honor to moderate a presentation by such a distinguished educator. Richard, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you very much. And I thank everyone for coming to my home for a discussion of a very, very timely topic. So here we are. The title of the talk is Plastics, the Ocean's Curse. And I begin with this photograph of Greenland. Now, Greenland has very low population density. You would not expect very much a presence of water that's spoiled with plastic debris. So here's this beautiful picture with some icebergs. But I'm really tricking you because this region of Greenland is in fact spoiled with an abundance of waste, much of it plastic waste. So the objective of this talk is to identify the problem of plastic pollution. Secondly, to discuss what's being done to address the problem and offer suggestions that the audience can implement in their daily activities. So let's begin with another example or two of the problem of plastic pollution in our waterways. This happens to be a town in Manila, a region in Manila rather, and you see homes on both sides of the creek, but you can't see the water because the water is completely spoiled by the presence of debris, a lot of it plastic. Do we have a happy or a sad face with this image here? Again, you're looking at the water, but you can't see the water because it's covered with all of this debris. So what are these plastic items and how are they deposited around the world? So we're going to look at this thing in a global sense. Many of these items are single-use plastics, and they are bottles and caps, and they are shopping bags and food packages, especially fast food items, drinking cups, plastic straws, toys, polyester clothes. And these items are thrown away, blown away, or left in place before ending up in the drains and then into streams, rivers, and then finally into the oceans. Let's give an example of this Coca-Cola uses about 11 billion kilograms of plastic each year. 117 billion bottles were produced in 2018. The good news is that about 52% of it was recycled. The problem is, where are the other 56 billion bottles? Some plastic debris is introduced during both the manufacturing process and also during transport of the raw polymer supplies to product manufacturing facilities. I'll talk about that a little later in the presentation. So here's a view of the world back in 1962. And you're looking at the amount of debris that's in the oceans. And way on the right side is a scale that is color-coded that indicates that arrow, my cursor is pointing to this arrow. The deep blue represents very low concentrations of pollution in the world. And that's really seen many, many parts of the world. However, off the west coast of the United States over towards Japan, you begin to see a higher amount of pollution. And then over here by India, in the Indian Ocean, the color is even brighter. So we're now moving up this list right here. Okay, so that's where we were in 1962. Now fast forward to 2018, and we see an enormous change in the concentration of pollution in the world. There is an enormous collection of this off the west coast of the United States, sort of around where Hawaii is. The Indian Ocean, as you can see, has been just inundated with plastic. And these areas, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, these are 5 major swirls of plastic debris throughout the world's oceans. They're called gyres, and it's pronounced like tires, and they're associated with various ocean currents. And they are spread over 16 million kilometers of area. And it's the size of Australia and the United States. And here's an example of one of these gyres. There is actually a scuba diver right here. So if you see that, he's doing some research there. But look at the expanse of this area of heavy concentration. Now, since this is the size of Texas, it's infinitely larger than the image that you're looking at here. In fact, there's a special name for the one out in the North Pacific, and that's the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And that's twice the size of Texas. And COVID-19 has contributed to waste accumulation, and that has generated increased usage of single-use plastics. And I suspect that many of you in the audience have contributed to this. For example, think about all the gloves that you used and then threw away. How many masks have you used and thrown away? If you were fully vaccinated, then you had 2, if not 3 syringes. And then there's also the protective equipment. So it's a major, major problem. Each year, for example, there are about 12 million tons of plastic that's produced that goes into the ocean, with more than 150 million tons already there. The Pew Charitable Trust estimates the annual waste production that's going to go into the oceans is going to triple in the not too distant future. So from 10 to almost 30. That's equivalent to 1 to 3 plastic-filled New York City garbage trucks being dumped into the ocean every minute, every day for an entire year. You essentially have 110 pounds of plastic per meter of coastline around the world. The Ocean Conservancy Organization, which is a non-GEO, a non-NGO, non-government organization, found that plastic comprises about 85% of beach debris. This plastic debris can be further dispersed by mechanical breakdown and or by photodegradation due to UV radiation from the sun, and that gets these plastic debris into even smaller pieces. And some of it is on the order of 5 millimeters, that's 0.2 of an inch, or smaller. A UN study estimated that the ocean contains about 51 trillion microplastic particles. These particles, these microplastic fibers in clothing can be washed out during a particular cycle that is made from polyester and acrylic threads. And the estimates are that roughly 700,000 microplastic fibers can be released from a single washing cycle. Question is, where are the majority of these microplastic particles? It turns out that virtually all of it, about 95%, are found below the surface of the ocean. The Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute found that the vast majority are in the range of about 650 to 3,000 feet below the surface. And furthermore, one study found that plastics in the intestinal tract of animals living in the Mariana Trench at a depth of 36,000 feet. The vast majority of these plastics were polyethylene terephthalate, and the abbreviation is PET. It's commonly used in the making of Dacron fiber. So while there are big polymer chunks floating on the surface, you literally have a gazillion tiny pieces that are floating either at various depths, or they may be accumulating on the sea floor. In fact, a recent Australian study using a robotic submarine at depths up to about 10,000 feet found 1.25 microplastic particles per gram of sediment. So it estimates that there are roughly 14 million tons of microplastics that are sitting on the seafloor. The ocean is filled with tiny creatures such as larvaceans. They excrete a mucus bubble around their body. They attract both tiny sea creatures and microplastic particles. In this ecosystem, these fish are eaten by larger fish, and larger fish, and larger fish, until they enter the human food chain. So in a gross sense, that fish dinner we may have eaten last night or last week perhaps contain remnants of someone's undershirt or a piece of a plastic container that came from your refrigerator. Every human ingests about 2,000 plastic particles per week, and that comes from the water we drink, the air you breathe, and the food you eat. In fact, these microplastic particles are being found in snow. So certainly no water around there. You just have a lot of snow, and from the Arctic to the Alps, and they're found in the air we breathe. In some European locations, in addition, there are reports of about 25,000 microplastic particles per liter of water. So it is everywhere, everywhere. Scientists know that the smaller the size of these particles, the more readily they are absorbed into the body. And if they get very small, then they penetrate cell membranes and ultimately introduce potentially toxic chemicals into the cell's biological makeup. Indeed, one study found such particles in cancerous human lung tissue. The question is, did these particles and their chemical constituents cause the cancer? We don't know. We don't know. But I take seriously the comment by a French scientist who remarked that, quote, with microplastics pouring into our environment, it is highly likely that we will only find out the safe levels after we have exceeded them. That's a very dire prospect. So here's his picture of microplastic soup, just the collection of debris that's on the beach. So the pictures on left and right are examples of small little particles that are winding up on beaches. Here's another example. In this particular case, I call your attention to many small little multicolored small pellets. So I'll get my cursor. Here's my cursor right here. So you can see some white ones, some light blue ones. Here there are darker ones, and here they may be black particles. There's little blue ones over there. These are called nerdles. And they are really the first stage of making a polymer or a plastic component. You take the oil, you melt it down, you process it, and you get plastic. And it's usually in the form of these small little particles that are less than 5 millimeters in size. They call them nerdles. And those things are then shipped to injection molding and extrusion machines to produce polyethylene or polypropylene or polystyrene or PVC, polyvinyl chloride, or PET or polyethylene terephthalate. And that's to make bottles and containers. And over the last 30 years, there have been major problems and complaints about these nerdles since they're washing away from factory sites as a result of rainstorms, and they wind up in the streams and rivers and oceans. And those are some of the examples that I just showed you. This problem was called to the attention of these companies, and they in turn formed a consortium called Operation Clean Sweep in 2005. So that's about 17 years ago. And they agreed that they would do everything they could to clean up the mess. Well, 17 years later, not much has been cleaned up. And in fact, lawsuits have been brought to companies. For example, the Formosa plastic company recently was fined $50 million and designated as a serial offender. Why such a stark description? Well, they found during discovery in the trial that there were 26-year-old corporate emails confirming that the company knew of the problem, but they obviously didn't do very much about it. Fast forward to last May, and we have the largest plastic spill in history. There was a cargo ship called the Express Pearl that caught fire and sank off the coast of Sri Lanka. On board, among other things, were 1,680 tons of nerdles that were released into the Indian Ocean. And they, in turn, washed up along 200 miles of beaches to a depth as much as 2 meters, about 6 feet deep. Here's an example of nerdles. So these are not the ones from Sri Lanka, just typical grouping of nerdles. That's basically the size. So you get, looking at the hand, you get this perspective. And they came from containers like this. Now, I would say that these containers are not terribly rigorous in terms of their structure. If you look very carefully along here, it looks like these are cardboard containers. And these are massive, massive things. And you can imagine how many millions and millions and millions of plastic particles that there are in these containers. These two photographs show you nerdles on the left, nerdles from train spillage in Louisiana, and on the right are nerdles found on the beach in southern France. Different events, different spillage, different locations. And then finally, here's the massive Sri Lankan spill, and the workers are collecting the plastic nerdles on the beach, and you can see the mounds of plastic nerdles that have been collected. There's another problem with these nerdles, that they not only look ugly on the beach, but what you see here is the nerdles appear to be a nice snack for fish and sea life. So here is a dead fish, and if you look in the fish's mouth, you see an accumulation of nerdles. So you might have a situation where this fish died from starvation because its stomach was filled with these plastic particles. These nerdles in turn will float or sink depending upon the polymer chemistry, the density rather, and whether the water is fresh or saline. Much more importantly is that the pellets will fragment into nanoparticles, even smaller particles, And in turn, these nerdle particles will act as toxic sponge that attract onto their surface chemical toxins and other pollutants that are hydrophobic. In other words, they repel water. So you have toxic concentrations that can be 1,000,000 times greater than the average amount of toxicity in the water. So the poisonous effect of ingesting these particles is very, very problematic. The nerdles, by the way, are the second largest source of micropollutants per weight in the ocean. About 230,000 tons end up in the ocean each year. And yet these nerdles are not deemed to be hazardous substances, according to the Coast Guard and other government agencies. If they were to be designated as hazardous, then it would require that the nerdles would have to be contained in more robust pellet containers, not the cardboard ones that I just showed you, and also not to be stored on deck. They would have to be stored below deck. So what is this, by the way, just before I move on, what is the largest oceanic micropollutant? And I was surprised because it never dawned on me, but the greatest micropollutant is automotive tire dust. So you buy a new tire and several years later, you buy another new tire, and that's because the tread has worn away. Did some calculations. It turns out that about 1/4 of an inch of tread is worn away. And if you take into account the density and the circumference of all the tires, you find that roughly 8 pounds of tread per tire are consumed or abraded away during the life of the tire. And then I went into another website and I found that sales are roughly 2 billion tires per year. So we're looking at 8 million tons per year of automotive dust, automotive tire dust. So what is the consequence of these large and small plastic debris in the ocean? Well, first of all, as I showed you already, it's ugly to look at, and it's also unhealthy. So here are 2 boys, 1 and 2. They are in New Delhi and they're swimming in a river, and you see all the plastic wraps. It's just a horrific thing. So that's one thing. Secondly, it's dangerous for marine life. Here is a sea lion that is ensnared in fishing nets and fishing lines. Here is an albatross that is dead on the beach. The body has begun to decompose, and the stomach has decomposed, revealing what was in the stomach. And what was in the stomach is a whole cluster of plastic particles. So the albatross thought it was a food source, and so they ate it. And again, this albatross may have starved to death because there was no room for food in the bird's innards. Here is a sea turtle that perhaps suffocated to death. Here's the plastic bag that they thought was something worthwhile eating, and it just smothered them. This is a very disturbing image. There was a 5-minute video that I watched that really affected me deeply. This is a live sea turtle, and there is something stuck in the turtle's nose. And a biologist was trying to remove it to help the sea turtle. And for 5 minutes, they struggled to get this piece of whatever out of the turtle's nostril. And it turns out that they eventually did. And what it was an extracted plastic straw that was as long as this plier. So that thing that was in the head of the sea turtle was about that long. So that's why I feel very, very strongly about not using plastic straws. What we have here are roughly almost 2.5, 3 dozen plastic bags that were laid out on the dock, and they all came from the belly of one beached whale. So the whale thought that this was worth eating, and so you ate that up. And here's another albatross and another stomach that had been filled with plastic. Some of these images came from a video called Blue Planet 2, and that was put out by BBC, and it was narrated by David Attenborough, a noted individual who's an environmentalist. And his works are outstanding. Highly recommend viewing them. And finally, here is a live turtle that's about to eat a piece of plastic bag, again from Blue Turtle. So this gives you an idea of what's going on in the oceans and how it's adversely affecting sea life and also bird life. So at this point, let's find out what these plastic resins are. And there's a numbering system that was set up by chemical organizations just for codification purposes. So number one is called polyethylene terephthalate, or peat. It's used in food packaging and containers, clothing fiber, polyester fiber, for example, Dacron fiber. It's the largest recycling effort for construction products such as plastic wood. So the plastic containers, for example, would be melted down and then reformed as plastic wood with certain advantages. The wood is very stable, and the plastic wood is stable, and it would not rot away as regular wood would. Number two is high-density polyethylene. That's used in the manufacturing of toys and packaging containers and bottles and bags. Roughly 30% of these bottles are recycled to make non-food containers. Okay. Number three is PVC. That's found in piping and shower curtains and vinyl flooring and waterbeds. Number four is low-density polyethylene. That's found in juice cartons and also these ubiquitous plastic grocery bags. Number five is polypropylene, or PP, and those are found in yogurt and margarine tubs and kitchenware and cups. Number six is the no-no category. Well, there were others as well, but this one's particularly polystyrene. It's used in DVD cases, although those are becoming extinct now, no longer used with the changes in technology. But they're found in disposable cutlery and styrofoam. Styrofoam is really a bad guy, because nobody wants to use styrofoam. It doesn't really recycle. So it's just an undesirable plastic to be hanging around. And number seven is a catch-all phrase for other, and that would include polycarbonate, nylon, fiberglass, or acrylic. Now, how do you know what these plastics are? So I mentioned 1 through 7, but is there a way for you, the viewer, to know what kind of plastic you have in your refrigerator or in your pantry? And the answer is it's fairly easy. All you have to do is turn the item upside down, and at the bottom, you'll see a little triangle with a bunch of arrows that simply indicates recycling. So it's going around in circles, so it's reused. Number one, as I've said before, is polyethylene terephthalate. Number two, it's a little more difficult to see, but you can make out number two, and that's high-density polyethylene. Here's another example. Here's number 5, that's polypropylene, and number 6 is polystyrene. Number 6, there's polystyrene. And these 4 images I personally took from items that are either in my refrigerator or in my pantry. So now we ask ourselves, maybe we're making a big deal out of this, and maybe the plastics will degrade and or dissolve in time, and so we really don't have a problem. Well, unfortunately, microbes and enzymes do not recognize plastic as food, since these resins are oil-based and contain additives not recognized by these bioeaters, namely the microbes and the enzymes. So therefore, plastics don't readily decompose. So let's now ask ourselves, what is the typical time for decomposition? Well, I have a list here, just to show you this big long list. And I'll give you a couple of numbers. Paper towel, 2 to 4 weeks, it's gone. A banana peel, 3 to 4 weeks, it's gone. And now let's see what a foamed plastic cup, how long that'll last, 50 years. Plastic beverage holders or disposable diapers, 450 years. Fishing line, 600 years. And I have one more on my little chart here. Plastic bags, anywhere from 200 to 1,000 years. So we have a problem. This stuff is not going anywhere. So as noted earlier, the resins will photodegrade due to UV exposure. The plastic parts break down to become even smaller pieces that attract PCBs and DDT. At some point, they are eaten and enter the aquatic food chain. So it's important to remove these large plastic items before they break down into microplastic particles that will enter the fish and the human food chains. So how do we get this stuff out of the oceans? Floating debris occupies roughly 5% of the total amount of plastic in the ocean. By 2025, it's projected that there'll be about 1 ton of plastic for 3 tons of fish in the ocean. So the plastic particles are now becoming a significant fraction of what's in the ocean itself. There are companies that are collecting plastic debris and making jewelry out of it. Well, that's very nice, and you feel good because you've now taken some plastic off the beach and you're wearing this nice ring or bracelet. But quite frankly, it's a minuscule amount of plastic that's being recovered. You could also create sculpture. For example, Angela Posey, an artist, used plastic debris to make sculpture, and she and her associates have collected about 26 tons along the Oregon beaches. And here is Miss Posey with her friend Cosmo. Cosmo is a 6-foot-high puffin that she created from the waste products that she found on the beach. And here's another example. Here is a white polar bear at some recreational area, and there's a child looking up affectionately at this statue. I have a few more images for you for your delight. Here is a shark. Here is a fish, and here is a turtle with a jellyfish. Beautiful, beautiful things, but again, very, very small amount of polymer removal from the oceans. There are other ways in which people have come together to try to resolve the problem. There's a polymer or plastic collection exchange for rice that has been going on in Bali villages, over 200 of these villages. It turns out that when COVID took over the world's health situation, it caused a 50% drop in tourism in Bali. And so many workers were laid off and they returned to their villages, and they created a lot of plastic waste themselves, and that wound up on the beaches. To compound the problem, so you had an ugly beaches, and they were out of work, and so they couldn't afford to buy rice, which is their food staple. So a restaurateur named Janus Yasa proposed that people collect plastic debris in exchange for rice. And in fact, since 2020, about 500 tons of plastic were collected in exchange for 550 tons of rice, with amounts depending on the value of the plastic. And here's a picture of a woman collecting the plastic and bringing it to the exchange center where the material is bartered. There's, in a more meaningful way, there are some industrial-sized debris removal efforts that are underway. One of them is associated with a company called Ocean Cleanup, and they are proposing to take a 2.5-mile long boom that is itself 10 feet deep, bring it out into the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, and allowing that boom to drift with the ocean currents, thereby enabling that boom to collect the floating debris. Periodically, that pile of debris in that 2.5-mile long boom is collected by ships and then brought back and disposed of. The company hopes to have 10 working booms by 2027. Another example is Mr. Trash Wheel. So here is a device that's going through a canal in the Baltimore Harbor area, and they have sort of a boom-like thing that's collecting all the debris that's there. Millions and millions of cigarette butts and plastic bags and plastic bottles. To this point, none of that stuff, it's collected, but none of it could be recycled. And so what they're doing is sending it to an incinerator, which has its own problems, as I'll discuss in a moment. So what can we do? One of the things that we can do is to use less plastic. So single-use plastic, SUP, the abbreviation. So use less of it, fewer cups, fewer plastic shopping bags, and drinking straws. China, for example, as a country, eliminated non-biodegradable plastic bags from large cities by 2020, and all cities and towns by the end of this year. They eliminated single-use straws used in all restaurants. And European Parliament voted to ban single-use plastic by 2021. So they would only allow plastic that was at least partially recycled. And the government also directed people to use just 40 plastic shopping bags per head per year by 2025. Senator Udall has a proposal for an environmental bill that would exact a bottle tax and require companies that produce and sell packaging products to pay for waste collection. He also wants to freeze construction of new plastic producing plants. That's a heavy lift to do something like that. And in fact, there is opposition from the oil industry. As I mentioned, the oil industry is very much involved in the manufacture of plastic materials. So the oil industry is fighting back as more and more cars become electric. That means that their gasoline sales are going to drop. So the crude oil needs to be repurposed, and one of the activities and efforts is to produce more plastic. And that goes directly against item number 1 on my list of using less plastic. So we have a competition of ideas here. Let's take a look at your shopping activities. Here I have a photograph of Winn-Dixie plastic bags, public plastic bags, and Walmart plastic bags. That to me is the least desirable thing that you could do when you go to a food store. And if someone asks you paper or plastic, please ask for paper. You can go to other stores that don't give you plastic. And in fact, Trader Joe's and Whole Foods will provide you paper bags. That's better. You can go one step farther, and here is a photograph of a section of Costco's store, Costco's area, and I'm sure that I forgot the name of the Walmart superstore, but they have cardboard boxes that you can then pick up and put your groceries into the cardboard box and take that home. That's a little better. But I think that the best is really to do this. These 5 burlap bags, or whatever they are, linen bags, or some kind of material, I have in my car. And when I go into Costco, for example, I take these bags along with me, or I take my shopping cart out to the car, and then I load up with all of these bags that I've used dozens and dozens and dozens of times. And it makes me feel better that I haven't had tens and hundreds of these plastic things that have been introduced into the world. The second thing, besides using less plastic, is to use biodegradable plastics. Now, this is very early in the development of a new product. For example, a company called Avantium is trying to make plastics from plant sugar instead of from oil. And they are experimenting with making cardboard bottles that are lined with a plant plastic that will decompose in 1 year approximately if the cardboard bottle is composted, or just a few years in normal outdoor conditions, which is infinitely better than the presence of these plastic bags. These efforts are being supported by Carlsberg, a big brewery from Denmark, the Coca-Cola company, and also Danone, the yogurt maker. All right, so these we could use biodegradable plastics, which is a good idea. The third thing is to recycle the plastics, and you're beginning to see on television advertisements by container manufacturers like, oh, we can recycle, and it's wonderful, and this is great, and so my product is really great product. Problem is that so much of it is not being recycled. And here is what you've got. I mean, there are numerous plastic products like plastic wood that are used in the case of Naples, Florida, a clam pass, which is a walkway to go to the beach. That's made out of plastic wood, and probably from milk containers made out of polyethylene terephthalate. The point that you need to know, though, is that since 1950, the world has created 6.3 trillion kilograms of plastic, but 91% of that plastic has never been recycled, even once. So there are local and worldwide recycling stories, but much more needs to be done. Here's an interesting example of recycled materials. Adidas, the manufacturer of sporting shoes and clothing, they built a floating tennis court off the coast of Australia, and they brought along a couple of Australian professional tennis players to play some doubles. The court was built using recycled plastic, and it was donated to a local school. The company, more interestingly, I believe, the company has pledged to use 90% of recyclable materials for its apparel lines by 2025. So that's good. Here is a very interesting story. These buildings in the background were made from plastic. There were 200 housewives in a small area in the Ivory Coast. They collected plastic waste from affluent neighborhoods and sold it to a recycling company called Conceptos Plásticos, which is a Colombian, South American company. That company in turn took the plastic and made plastic interlocking bricks. And then they got into a contract and a project with UNICEF to use these interlocking bricks to make 528 classrooms across the country of Ivory Coast. So there's another example of using this material. Now here's another example where the thing is not really recycled, it's repurposed. So here is a house that was, the walls of which were constructed by taking plastic polyethylene terephthalate bottles, filling them with sand, stacking them, and then cementing them together to form building walls to create buildings in third world countries. So very, very ingenious thing that they're doing. The sad part is that there are limitations for polymer recycling. First of all, the plastic waste often contains multiple types of polymers. There are expensive labor costs associated with the separation of the different plastic components. The plastic items are often contaminated by food and other items, and therefore they're not clean and pure enough to be cloned into a plastic container that carried some food products. What they do use, though, however, is that food container then reappears as a container for detergents or motor oil, or maybe used, as I said, for plastic wood. Recycling facilities are themselves costly to build. So you need a very large daily volume to justify the cost of construction. Most widely recycled polymers are PET, polyethylene terephthalate. That's associated with yarn for clothing. You make that into plastic wood. High-density polyethylene, about 30% of high-density polyethylene bottles are recycled to produce non-food containers or pipes, for that matter. And here's a photograph of the recycling center in Naples. This is just south of Immokalee Road, and it's just on a Goodlet Frank road. These municipal facilities take these plastics, they try to separate them according to clear versus colored. They try to separate them according to their chemistry, for example, and they wind up with the fact that they have some polymers that are recyclable and others that are really not, like the styrofoam and the PVC. So the separation efforts are very laborious and labor intensive and often only partially successful. So you wind up with high quality plastic waste that can be used and repurposed, and then you also have the low quality plastic that nobody wants. So the two questions that arise are, what are you willing to pay for high quality plastic? And what do you do with the low quality junk that nobody wants? In fact, an increasing number of municipalities are now beginning to reject most plastics. For roughly 20 years, it turned out it was convenient and useful in the United States for us to sell our plastic garbage overseas. That's right, you heard me correctly. We sold our plastic garbage overseas. As of 2017, the US exported 16 million tons of plastic. That's about 4,000 shipping containers per day. So who was buying our garbage? Well, for a period of 20 years, China bought roughly 50% of the world's waste garbage, consisting of waste paper, plastic, and metal products. In fact, plastic waste was the United States' 6th largest export to China. The US is the world's largest producer of plastic waste per person, and we were delighted that someone was going to pay us to take it away. Other Western nations concurred. For example, Ireland sent 95% of its waste material to China in 2016. It was really a win-win situation. China received massive amounts of raw materials that could be recycled into new products for export to the West. The labor-intensive task of plastic separation was justified by a low-wage marketplace and vast amounts of readily available manpower. And here are some photographs of some Chinese workers in one of their cities. In fact, there are some cities that were designated as primary recycling venues. And here's another one. Here's a man in this mountain of plastic debris. And here is another pile of toys and the like. Unfortunately, in 2017, China suddenly said, no mas, no more. They instituted a policy called National Sword, and they placed severe restriction on the importation of waste materials. So why, after 20 years, did they suddenly do this? And this was certainly to the chagrin of the US towns and villages that were selling their waste to China and to just, the distributors who were doing that. Well, first of all, there were concerns for public safety and environmental issues in China. For example, entire towns that had been devoted to recycling efforts were being exposed to toxic chemicals. There were major problems. People were getting sick. And there was a documentary that was prepared in 2017, a film entitled Plastic China, which turned out to be very embarrassing for the Chinese government because it showed that people were really getting very, very sick. And so the government needed to do something to minimize that situation. For another reason why they stopped is because wage levels were rising in China, and that was putting pressure on the plastic separation recycling costs. Number 4, with improved living standards, the Chinese people were generating enough plastic on their own to satisfy the country's needs. And number 5, there were problems with imports. Some were found to be dirty. In 1996, for example, China accidentally imported 100 tons of radioactive waste from Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. And also the contaminated waste was piling up and polluting waters. So they said no mas, no more. Without China being able to take our garbage, what were we supposed to do with the plastic junk? As of 2015, only 9% was being recycled, 12% was being incinerated, and 79% went to landfills. Incineration, it turns out to be useful in the sense of providing an energy source, so that's good. Remember that the plastic is from oil. So that was good. However, the incineration process released greenhouse gases and cancer-causing dioxins. Initially, much waste was sent to Southeast Asian and African underdeveloped countries. Well, that's a bad idea. These countries have poor recycling and disposal infrastructure. For example, in the Philippines, 90% of plastic waste is dumped illegally along the side of the roads and ends up in the oceans. In 1989, there was a Basel Convention dealing with the control and the transboundary movement of hazardous waste and its disposal. So that was in 1989 for dangerous materials. But what we now find is that in 2021, last year, this Basel Convention included the plastic. as a hazardous material, and 187 countries have signed on to this convention. However, the United States is not completely on board with this effort. The international shipment of most plastic scrap and waste is to be allowed only with written consent of importing countries. So that's one of the major aspects of this Basel Convention. So there are additional efforts to get rid of plastic waste. Consumer and government pressure is being placed on companies to reduce the volume of plastic materials and eliminate certain polymers, such as styrene cups and plastic straws. For example, California, New York, and New Jersey are some of the states that have taken an aggressive position with regard to the elimination of these materials. There was a bill passed in 2015 called the Microbead Free Water Act of 2015. And that bill prohibits the use of microbead plastic fillers in things like toothpaste and cosmetic cleaning products, where these particles were used in the cleaning process, for example, to get rid of the tartar in your teeth. And those were found to be harmful to the environment, and so they were eliminated. There was another bill that was passed in 2018 called Save Our Seas Act. And the purpose of that bill was to set aside $10 million for events associated with severe weather storms. So if there was a major hurricane or whatever, and suddenly you had a beach that was just overwhelmed with plastic debris, the state that was affected could apply to NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, for funding to help in the cleanup. This is a bill that was passed by bipartisan agreement, and what you have here is Senator Sullivan, a Republican from Alaska, Sheldon Whitehouse from Rhode Island, and Cory Booker from New Jersey are Democrats. So that's a good thing. That was a good activity. Most recently, and this is, when I say recently, I mean a week and a half ago, a Nairobi conference got underway under the auspices of the United Nations Environment Assembly. And they are tasked with the idea of collecting information about plastic use in the world, and to set the stage for trying to find solutions to this problem of plastic pollution in waterways. So one of the things they want countries to do is to determine the amount of plastic that was produced in their country, how much recycling was being done in that country, what chemicals were being used in that country. And by the way, that particular one, the chemical use, that request was objected to by some countries, including the United States. And so it was not in the final version of this conference. And also the fourth one was how these items are to be disposed of. And with that information, that would be the most important climate initiative since the 2015 Paris Agreement. The report, they agreed that report would be prepared by 2024. And they also recognized the important role of recycling waste pickers. These are usually very low income people who are finding a job reclaiming gathering these plastics. And so they have an important function, these waste pickers do. In the meantime, what are we going to do with the plastic waste? So we still have a long way to go. We talked about a few items that could be helpful, but what are we going to do with our plastic waste? And coming to the end of my talk, and for those who are living in the Naples, Florida region, This is a map of the city, and this yellow line is Route 75. It goes from north from Tampa down to Naples and then across, going east towards Miami. And that's basically what that road does. And just off the edge, the elbow of this road is the Naples landfill. And here's a photograph of that landfill. Here's Route 75 going from the west. The Gulf of Mexico is over here, and way over here on the right is the Atlantic Ocean and Miami. This landfill that I'm showing you a photograph of was constructed in 1976, and there were at the time about 60,000 residents in Naples. Well, fast forward about 40 years, and we're now at 2015, and the population is roughly 6 times as large. So how long will it take for this landfill to be filled? And do we want to chase ourselves in perpetuity as we go from one landfill to the next? This is a major, major problem. So what can you do to eliminate plastic waste? One is use recyclable drinking cups. For example, avoid styrofoam. And if you look at my little icon on the side, when I go to play tennis, I take one of these metal containers, and that's where my ice water is. As opposed to using a styrofoam cup. And if you add up how many times I would play tennis, and what about my opponent, and what about the other opponent on the other side of the net, and what about the other courts that are available, and it's just amazing how much cups you're going to be consuming. Secondly, use recyclable shopping bags like the cloth sacks that I showed you. 3, don't wrap recyclables in grocery plastic bags. That's a real no-no. If you've got a bunch of these things and you're ready to go down and put them in the recycling bin, then put them in a paper bag. But don't use the grocery plastic bags, which are not recyclable, and they would then compromise the efforts to recycle. 4th, don't use plastic straws, and also clean your recyclable items. So when you're finished with something, rinse it off before you put it in the recycling bin. And lastly, be aware of what's going on in this whole area. And I call your attention to an organization called beyondplastics.org, which was founded by Judith Enck, who is working out of, oh my God, my mind's a blank. I can't think of the college. It's up north. Just can't think of it. I'm sorry. Bennington, maybe it's Bennington. I don't remember. I'm sorry. But if you go to the website, beyondplastics.org, you'll see where she works out of. And she has a little quote that I want to pass on to you. Just as in the 2015 Climate Accord, what is your carbon footprint? Her modification is, what is your plastic footprint? And we have then this picture of this lovely child, and I ask you to adhere to her admonishment. I will refuse disposable plastics. So think of that child. And furthermore, when you think about that child, unless we do something before that child is an adult, she will be buried in 5 times more plastic waste than we are now experiencing. How do I say that? Well, here's a chart of global plastic production. This is from 1950, and this is 2050. And where we are now is around here in this point, and that's about 350 million tons of plastic. And if we go another 30 years, 28 years, we get all the way up to here of 1.8 billion tons of plastic. So it's a major, major problem, and we need to be aware of it. We need to do something about it, and everybody can play a role in doing this. I have one final thought. And that one thought is, we are what we eat. Now, what has this got to do with my talk on plastics in the oceans? Well, this is a photograph of a group of cows that were foraging, looking for something to eat in a pile of plastic debris. This happened to be in Indonesia. And I ask you that if these cows were suddenly transported to the stockyards in Chicago and they wound up in a restaurant that you went to and you chose to buy a steak, how would you feel knowing where that steak came from? Is that what you want? So think about that. And so I thank you for your attention, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Very sobering. A lot of information. We thank you so much for putting it all together. And wow, almost speechless after that. I mean, we knew it, but we didn't know to the extent. There are quite a few observations and questions, and I'll try to get to some of them. We don't want to hold you forever. One person asks, please address this. By analyzing the waste found in the rivers and surrounding landscapes, researchers were able to estimate that just 10 river systems carry between 88 and 99% of the plastic that ends up in the ocean from rivers. 8 of them are in Asia: Yangtze, Indus, Yellow, Hai, Ganges, the Pearl, Amur, Mekong, and 2 in Africa, the Nile and the Niger. What do you have a comment on that? It's more of a comment than a question.
No, not really. These are probably major population areas that
Yes.
that embrace that river, and so I would expect that if you looked at the distribution of the population density, you'd find that that's where most of the people live, and that's where most of these plastics are consumed. So I don't know what else I can say other than that obvious thing.
Another comment that comes right after it is just a compliment. Thank you for an excellent organized presentation, and I certainly do agree with that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, here's one attendee says, I think I recently read that styrofoam is okay to put in the recycling bin in Collier County, which surprised me. Is this simply a mistake, or is there a way to recycle styrofoam?
I would think that this is a mistake. Now, there may be some efforts where some kinds of styrofoam, I mean, I at our tennis courts, for example, we use something that sort of looks like styrofoam, but they say it's 96% not. But styrofoam is not something that has a marketplace, and I would question whether styrofoam is something that people want to use. I just find it hard to believe.
Okay. Another question: are the decomposition times you mentioned for plastics in the ocean, in a landfill, or under what conditions?
I have this table in front of me with all kinds of numbers. Unfortunately, this table does not indicate where these items are that they're sitting around, whether it's in the ocean or on land. So I don't really know. I don't really know. But I would venture to say that because of the nature of the materials, I don't find that there would be a dramatic difference in where these things are. You know, it's what's interesting about recycling. One of first, material recycling efforts that were very successful was the recycling and reuse of aluminum cans. And maybe if you were a child, you may have collected aluminum cans, and they would give you a half a penny for a can or whatever it was. And the reason why this effort was so successful and was supported by the aluminum industry is because 90% of the, well, let me rephrase the question. Let me rephrase my remark. 90% of the cost of aluminum is in getting from the ore, which is called bauxite, that's aluminum oxide, to go from aluminum oxide to aluminum. It takes to take an aluminum can and melt it down and make a new aluminum product takes 10% of the energy than it does to make an aluminum product from bauxite. So to go from bauxite to an aluminum can costs 9 times as much as going from an aluminum can melted down into another aluminum can. Okay.
But not the case with plastics.
Not the case with plastics.
Right.
Mm.
Question: is it possible to make biodegradable plastic economically enough to largely replace regular plastic?
That's the $64,000 question. And
is anybody getting there?
Well, I mentioned this one little company that's making cardboard bottles, and Carlsberg Brewery is trying to fund this to help. It's a cost question, and I would submit that what we need to do as a nation is to have a series of programs that are federally and state funded that will address the issue of recycling, of addressing the issue of creating biodegradable materials. I remember when this is going to show my age, when Sputnik went up, and I was beginning my career after a few years, I was beginning my academic career, there was just an overabundance of fellowships that the federal government was giving for people in the area of science to try to catch up to the Russians who had the Sputnik up there. And I had a number of graduate students that work with me who had these fellowships from the government because they addressed a problem. And I would say we have a problem. And I would say that funds should be identified for the development of recycling efforts, to optimize recycling efforts, to optimize the segregation of one polymer from another. There are efficient ways of doing this. Right now, you pick up a plastic and you turn it upside down and you look at it and you say, okay, it's got a number 4 on it, so I'll put it in this bin. And then you see how labor intensive that is. There may be some ways to do this more efficiently. That remains to be seen. And then the same thing with biodegradable materials. We need research. And I think it's getting beyond what a company can do. It has to be a national effort, I believe, a world effort.
You mentioned governments, and I'm afraid I know the answer to this question already. Someone asks, what is the status of Florida banning disposable plastic shopping bags? New York has already done this.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
State of Florida.
Yeah, is that what they're doing?
No, they're asking, what is the status of the possibility that Florida might ban plastic bags the way New York has already done?
Well, I hope they do. I don't know whether.
Are there any initiatives that you know of?
No.
Neither.
I don't know.
Neither, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Where does floating debris that's gathered out in the ocean actually get taken and disposed of?
Well, this ocean cleanup organization is claiming that they will be able to to have this 2.5 mile boom and have a whole bunch of these out there and collect this stuff, put it on a ship, and then the question is, what do you do with it now that you have it? I mean, their effort is to clean up the garbage patch. All right. So, okay. So what if you now pick all this stuff up magically with a great vacuum cleaner, and you go out into the Pacific and you suck it all up, and then you take it? Well, where do you take it? Are you going to put it in a landfill? Are you going to recycle it? So we're back to the same basic question. You would, it's like, moving the chairs around on the Titanic. How are we going to help ourselves if we're not going to address the issue of what do you do with this stuff? So,
yeah. Here's a question that is local, but probably is relevant across the country, really. When you take plastic bags back to Publix, for example, or
yeah.
other stores for recycling, are
Yes.
they really recycled? Are they recycled into what?
I don't know. I know that these bags have limited market value, these plastic bags. And I would, I don't know how to answer. I don't know how to answer that question. These are, to me, my way of thinking, undesirable items. They're necessary because you have to take your products home from the stores. But I urge everyone to use bags, cloth bags that you can use over and over and over again. And I think you'll feel good about it, and you're really going to help.
Science-related question, not policy. Are there no microorganisms that can devour some kinds of plastics?
Not to my knowledge. I'm not a biologist or a biochemist, so I can't answer that question. I just reading that the plastic materials are not something that enzymes and microbes find attractive and will eat away like let's see now, an apple core. It'll last 2 months. All right. Orange peel, 6 months. All right. Plywood, 1 to 3 years. And it goes on and on. But even cigarette butts, 10 to 12 years. And it's just a horrific situation that we have.
Another question. Do you believe that plastic manufacturers should assume some of the plastic recycling costs rather than have local municipal governments bear most of these costs with your local tax dollars?
I have to admit that I submitted that question to you.
You did.
For purposes of discussion. And so I would like people to think about this. I'd like you to think about whether you believe that those costs should be at least shared with the manufacturer. And the same thing with waste. For example, when your tire wears out and you go and you buy a new tire, did you notice that you pay a tax for the removal of that tire? So there's a disposal cost that you have to pay. So should there not be a disposal cost for these plastics?
Yeah, good point.
Should there be, for example, a tax like a refund charge, so that these materials will have, there's an incentive to get this item back. Just like I remember when I was a child, we had milk containers and the milk was in glass, and you had a deposit that you brought back. And so why should there not be something similar to that? So think about that one as well. I believe the answers are yes, but I think that just to promote discussion, I would urge and encourage the viewership to think about this, talk with your friends and your family, and say, well, we have all these problems. What are we going to do about it? And is that such a terrible burden? I mean, we used to have refundable things. I looked at a product just the other day. It was an apple bottle, plastic bottle. Okay, and on the label it said Hawaii 5 cents, Maine 5 cents. So in that state, they are having recover charge. That's 2 states. What about the other 48? So think about that one.
Yeah, we're coming to the end of the time. There's a question relating to your water bottle that's not plastic.
Yes.
And this person asks a question. In Europe, it seems plastic bottles for water, etc., are being replaced by aluminum bottles. This seems like a good idea. I don't know whether it's mandated over there or an industry initiative. It's a good idea. Why isn't the US doing something similar? Rarely do you see an aluminum water bottle here. Now, we've seen yours, but any idea why we're not seeing a much broader push for bottles like yours?
Well, let me answer your question by going back in. I'm going to screen share because there's a slide I wanted that I didn't have time to show. So let me go back and put it up on the screen. So hold on a minute. All right. So can you see that? So you want to play tennis, okay? If I have 1 cup per match times 3 matches a week, I'm using 3 cups a week times 4 weeks a month. That's equal 1 foot long stack of cups per month, or 12-foot high stack per year.
Okay.
Now, if my doubles partner also used the disposal cups, and that would amount to a stack 24 feet high or 48 feet high if the opposing team used cups as well. And then if the match involved 3 teams, then you would need 144 feet of cups, or roughly half the length of a football field. And that's about 1,750 cups. So that's just one little match that you might have from your club. So it's amazing how it adds up. Amazing how it adds up.
But do you know of any initiatives? I think that was the question, initiatives to try to promote aluminum or non-plastic.
Not that I'm aware of, and I would suspect that the cost for all of those aluminum cups would be much, much, much higher than styrofoam cups or whatever kind of cup is available. Yeah, so it's a cost. It's cost factor. I mean, I've got. Let me go back out. Stop sharing. So let me come back again to the world of the living here. Yeah. So
I think on that note, we've taken a lot of your time, and we're deeply grateful to you, Richard, for sharing your wisdom and all of the information, as sobering as it is, that you collected. And our thanks also go to you, webinar participants, for the questions and comments, not all of which we could get to.
May I interject for a second and just
Please.
thank Ken Marks and Sephora Brown for their help in making sure that the technical aspect of the presentation was organized. We had a little glitch. I have a new computer, and so the new computer didn't quite remember what the old computer did, so we had to go through some gyrations to get ourselves organized for the day.
Oh, Ken and Sephora are stars. We're very lucky to have them. There's no doubt about that.
Yes.
The CCT is reviewing possibilities for an April webinar. So please keep an eye out for the sign up e-blast for that one, as you did to come on to today's webinar. And we look forward to your being with us then. And we thank you again, Richard. And we urge all of you to stay well and think critically.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.